Hey guys, welcome to day two and a half of this massive table build. Had a couple hours when I had a friend over here and we were doing the jointing of the top here. So we're gonna start by finishing gluing up the top so that can be drying. Then I'm gonna jump on the legs, joining those up, making that up the legs for this table, and then I'll get to cutting out the bench. When I get done with everything, I'm going to plane this all flat on the top and the bottom, and then route with a round over bit, route around all the edges. I've got to cut the ends off still to the final length. From there, jump right in it. All right, got it all glued up. As the old saying goes, he who dies with the most clamps wins. I still have a few more. I did stop and pick up some longer clamps to help today on gluing this top up. But I did put some 2x4s underneath it just to help make sure that it stays nice and flat and that it doesn't try to cup on me. I put the blue painter's tape on there for the same reason I put the Christmas paper down, so that if there is glue on the bottom of it, and I don't want the 2x4s permanently glued to the bottom of my tabletop. I will be planing down the top of it, so a little bit of cupping or unevenness is okay. I'm gonna plane all that out, but I would like to keep it as minimal just to keep that work down. So moving on, now it's gonna be legs for the top. So I went ahead and pre-cut my legs. The final length is going to be 28.5, which will give the table a 30-inch height overall. I went ahead and jointed one side and cut them down to width on the table saw. So they're 21 inches wide, 29 inches tall. Once I get them jointed, and I've still got to put biscuits in these and glue them up. But I left them a little bit long, so just in case, they shift a little bit, and I've got 1/8 of an inch overlap on one end or the other, I can come back and trim the 1/4 of an inch off of each side of it, and they'll be straight again. So that's just a little tip. Don't cut your final length before you glue up. Otherwise, you may wind up shorter than you wanted to be because you have to cut it off to make it even again. So I'm going to cut the biscuits in these. I may have to wait till that dries to get some clamps out of it. And if I do, then I'll jump over to the bench. If not, then I'll get the legs glued. So I'm going to put these together, and I'm going to get the best fit that I can get, and then I'm going to take my pencil and mark these. This is A and A. That'll be B and B. That way, after I cut my biscuits in it, I'll know exactly what piece goes where and won't have to worry about gluing them up and they don't have a good fit. So these fit together real good, very little seam. Those fit together real good, very little seam. So I'm going to mark out for my biscuits, go ahead and cut those, glue them up, and have them set to the side. Alright, glue up of the table, planks for the table is complete. They're all sitting over there. I am completely out of clamps. I don't think I have any more laying around here anywhere. But anyway, so the bench top is going to be these 2x8s. It's going to be 6 foot long. It's going to be 2x8s, but I've got to rip them down to 7 inches because the bench is 14 inches wide. And it's going to have a 10-inch solid leg on each end and that arch underneath it. So I've got to get these ripped down. I may have to wait till tomorrow to glue them up because I don't want to take any of my clamps off. Get these ripped down and cut pretty close to the length that I want them. Then I've got to rip down the 2x12 or the 2x10 that I've got for the legs, and then I've got to cut those arches out for underneath the legs. So still got work to do. Okay, so I've got a slight change of plan, all because of math. So this 2x12 that I was gonna cut down to 10 inches for the bottom leg is 3/4 of an inch too short. This one's plenty long enough to cut out that 15-inch tall by 10-inch wide piece that I want, but this one's not. So I've got this 2x10 that's 15 3/8. So I think I'm gonna change the bottom a little bit. So instead of 14 inches wide, probably gonna make it 12 inches wide, and it'll have a 9-inch bottom or 9 1/4 inch bottom for the legs. I think that'll work out just fine. Plus I can rip that 9 1/4 out of this to match that. And then I'll make this 12 inch when I cut these 2x12s. All right, now I'm just gonna take one edge. These are really straight. So I'm just gonna take one edge off on the table. So I'm gonna put a 1/2 inch round over on all the others on the sides anyway, whenever I go to clean it up. So I want one side of it to be super flat so I can join the top of the bench. Like I said, the original plan was for it to be 14 inches wide. That's why I chose two 2x8s. But since I changed it, I could have used a 2x12. It would have been 11 1/4, 11 1/2 inches for the top. But I'm just going to make it 12 inches on the top, 9 1/4 inches on the legs, and it will work out just fine. Well, it's not perfectly jointed, but it's far better than what it was. Like I can pull that together when I clamp it. I could probably get all of that out, but I don't want to, continue taking material off my boards when I'm already at 11 1/2 inches. I would wind up being, 11 inches or something like that. So what originally started as 14-inch plan is now down to 11 1/2 inches. But that's okay. That still would fit somebody's bottom on it. So moving on with the project. Glued up, all of my planks are glued up. The leg for the table, this under here is the bench top, and then my arch pieces. So the next step for me, before I have to flatten all of this, is I'm gonna go ahead and figure out what kind of arch that I want on the bottom of this leg, because I really only want 4 points of contact on the floor, and then I can put some little felt pads in there, and it'll be a lot more stable than having this whole flat piece. And if there's any humps or abnormalities in the floor, then the table's gonna rock back and forth. So I'm gonna put an arch in here to match it as close as I can to the one underneath the table. And then this is each one of these is the bottom of the bench, and I'm gonna put a small arch in those. It won't be very deep, but because they're so narrow. But figuring out that, finding something that I can template that with, and then using the router and hogging all that material out, and then moving on from there. It took a little bit, but I did get it jigged up. It's like a Franken jig. But this will allow me to use my router on that first pass, and then I can do the same thing that I did on the arches, where I can use the first one as the template for the second one, and then I'll have to redo it or do something different for my legs for my bench over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and route these out, get them cut out, and they'll be mostly finished. All right, so I'm pleased with that. That worked out pretty well. I will have to sand it, just cleaned it up a little bit. I did use the remaining part of my yardstick that I didn't use on my table saw jointer that I built. So if any of you guys have a spare yardstick out there, mine's ruined. If you really use one, you got one laying around, just hit me up, come pick it up from you. Just kidding, guys. But extra uses for yardsticks. So I couldn't get my yardstick to bend the radius this short. So this old food bowl, animal food bowl, was just perfect. So I had to trace it out, trimmed it out with a jigsaw real nice. Would have been better with a bandsaw, but I don't have a bandsaw. So I did jigsaw, sanded it down where it's smooth. I clamped this down and route out the arch and the legs. So I'm gonna have to build a jig to be able to use my router to plane off the top of this, then I can sand it flat and finish it, put it all together and finish it. So all of my pieces that were glued together, all of my jointed pieces that are glued together, I'm going to plane those down a little bit to get them flat and smooth. May run the rest of these through there just for dimensional, but now I've got to get to building that giant router table planer sled thing. All right, one giant sled to flatten the top of this table, all made out of scraps. Took me about 35, 40 minutes maybe to make. So I'm gonna take a piece of scrap and test it out, and then I'll get to planing these pieces. So I got all of my pieces planed down. There are some tooling marks from the router. But next up is every woodworker's absolute most favorite step, sanding. That's sarcasm. Everyone hates sanding. I'm going to put a mask on because this makes this real fine dust that I don't want to breathe in. That router made a mess of my shop. But I'm going to go ahead and sand down the bench and probably try to assemble it, because Miss Mandy is dying to see what this thing is going to look like once it's assembled. And the bench is a miniature version of the table. So before I cut the ends off the table and put it up here and plane it down, I'm going to try to get this bench assembled. So I'm not going to make you guys suffer through watching me sand. It's boring. So we'll get to it. All right, guys, as you can see how I'm dressed, it is very cold. It's the breath, steam off my breath. It's very cold. I'm out of propane for my heater. We're kind of snowed in, and I called around and nobody has any, so doing the best I can with a couple of electric heaters that I have. So I'm going to cut some, this is 3/8 dowel rod, and I'm going to cut a bunch of pieces at 1.5 inches on my table saw sled. I use the Sled just because it's a tiny cut, or a very short cut, and it's much safer on the sled, and it's repeatable with a stop block. So I'm going to cut all this into 1.5 inch long dowels, and this is what I'm going to use to glue the bench and the tabletop together. Nothing like working on your tools in order to work with your tools. I don't know if you've ever seen anybody sand a sander, but there's got some junk on my belt sander. Clean this up, then I'm going to take each one of those dowels across the belt sander and just sharpen the ends a little bit to make them easier to start in the holes that I've got to drill for the dowels. So get this cleaned up, get a new belt on it. So on the ends of these, where I have to drill for my dowel pins, I'm going to use my cordless drill. There's just no way I can get that router with that plunge bit in here and hold it without wobbling and everything. So I think it'll be a little easier with this. I'm going to use a smaller bit to drill a pilot hole, but I did measure off on my 3/8 bit the depth that I needed to go, and I put some blue masking tape on there so that I know when to stop when I'm going in. So I'm going to get those drilled on the ends. I'm ready to glue up the base of the bench. I'm going to pull the dowels out, make sure I glue those up good, stick them back in there, and also glue on the face where it's meeting the end there. And I wanted to point out, I'm using these cheaper bar clamps that I got from Harbor Freight, and I noticed that when you tighten it down, they leave a little bit of an imprint on my wood. So to combat that, cut a couple of pieces of just regular old cardboard that I'm going to put in between the clamp and the wood to try to prevent any marring on the surface that I've already sanded. So wish me luck. Let's get the glue up. So here's my thought. Instead of drilling those holes and then trying to mark it with those, I was thinking I could drive these are just little 1-inch panel nails. I wish I had something smaller than that, but I don't. So I'll drive these in. That'll mark my hole here. And then when I set the top on it, I can do essentially the same thing where I just give it a good pop. And the heads on these will make a nice indentation in the bottom of the top. Pull it off, pull the nails out, drill these holes, drill those holes, match it all up and glue it in. And I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but I hope that it's gonna work better than those sharpened dowels did. So we get to that. That worked so much better. Left a little nail head indentation there, right there. That's right, camera. Right there's a good one. So yeah, it left all of them real good indentation. Now I can just pull the nails out and I can drill all the holes. right, so I'm waiting for the glue to dry on the bench. Gonna go ahead and end the video here. Stay tuned for part 3 where I complete the build and deliver it.